Stern has become such a wussified sycophant, he doesn't realize that telling Kamala that he'd vote for a wall is telling her that he knows she's as dumb as one. I mean, not to mention, Trump is the wall candidate, not Cackle's McKnee pads. Stern got even more pathetic, wondering how she doesn't nap.
That brings me to Howard Stern and his interview of Kamala Harris, where he put the cards on the table about how he was feeling, in particular about her latest media tour, which did not include Saturday Night Live, but she was lampooned on it a little. A lampoon may be too strong, but she was mocked, as they usually do, just to Republicans. Take a listen.
Greg Gutfeld and Megyn Kelly tore into Howard Stern's carefully curated legacy like a demolition crew with a personal vendetta. With Greg's sharp-edged sarcasm and Megyn's precise dismantling, they revealed the stunning fall of radio's original rebel into a pampered shadow of his old self. Stern's transformation from fearless iconoclast to celebrity comfort blanket wasn't just criticized, it was scorched. This wasn't commentary, it was a full-on takedown, and they didn't leave a single mic standing.
This is what keeps me up at night. I don't understand how my fellow Americans, I don't even understand how this election is close. And yes, I'm voting for you, but I would also vote for that wall over there. When you said you don't nap, I get it, because like what you've taken on is extraordinarily difficult. And I mean, do you feel the pressure of the moment in the sense that, like when I met you out in the hall, I said, I'm really nervous because I want this to go well for you. I want it to go well for the country. Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the, where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of.
Gutfeld opened with that trademark, crooked grin, the kind that says he's about to stir the pot and enjoy every second of it. But this wasn't about politics or pop culture punchlines. This time, the target was Howard Stern. The so-called king of all media, the shock jock, who once gave FCC agents nightmares and made suburban moms break a sweat in their Aeropostale gear. Greg didn't just roast Stern, he pulled him through a time machine, dug up the old receipts, and held them against the dimming flicker of what once counted as rebellion.
Period, while listening to it. You should hear what keeps him up at night.
Greg kicked off by marveling at Stern's transformation from the scruffy, foul-mouthed renegade of radio to a Botoxed robe-wearing figure who now sounds like he hosts mindfulness retreats between podcast episodes. Watching Howard Stern today, Greg said, is like discovering your favorite punk band opened a wellness spa in the Hamptons where they serve herbal tea and teach emotional regulation. He laughed, remembering how Stern once mocked everything: politicians, celebrities, political correctness, and anything that dared to take itself too seriously.
She also appeared on Howard Stern, where he said he'd even vote for a wall over Trump. Harris replied, I'm not a wall, but I am plaster.
Now, Stern's sipping green juice and offering apologies for the very jokes that built his empire. Greg said this wasn't just a sellout, it was a full liquidation. He didn't just trade in the mic. He sold the studio, the edge, and threw in whatever backbone he had left. He compared old Stern to a wrecking ball and current. Stern to a cautious interpretive dancer who only swings if legal says it's safe. Greg laughed at the irony how the man now preaching empathy and progress has a back catalog of bits that would get today's Howard canceled by his own standard.
But it is incredibly brave to take this stance after you've made $300, $400 million not being woke, right? Loving Donald Trump, exploiting the mentally ill, wearing blackface. Look at the crop of woke comics, whether it's Stern or Jimmy Kimmel, his BFF, Sarah Silverman, Joy Behar, Michael Ian Black. What do they all have in common? They wore blackface. And then they went woke. It's not a chicken or egg thing there. You know what order it came.
Then Greg zeroed in on the double standard. Stern spent decades casting himself as the unfiltered truth teller, the bold outsider. But once the SiriusXM paychecks hit and a few Alistairs circled in, he morphed into exactly what he once ridiculed, a well-insulated media darling. Surrounded by handlers and script-read interviews, the punk was gone. In his place stood a polished PR product, pre-approved and perfectly safe.
Now remember, Stern used to throw bologna slices at strippers' butts. With accuracy, I might add. Now he's worried the possible leader of the free world can't handle his verbal foot rub. I wonder if he used to get this nervous for the strippers before he'd spank them on their bare asses with a dead fish.
Greg mocked the shift in tone, noting how Stern, who once cringed at Hollywood phoniness, now rolls out the red carpet for celebrities and flatters them like a personal valet at a Vanity Fair party. It's not radio anymore. It's a high-end press junket, where actors come for compliments and Howard plays along like a therapist, desperate for 5-star reviews. Greg painted the scene perfectly. Stern's studio now resembles a museum of fading coolness, dim lights, dramatic shadows, and a voice that sounds more like a luxury car ad than rebellion. Stern didn't age, he became a wax figure, propped up by nostalgia and hair dye. And his audience. Greg joked that the biggest miracle is how anyone who remembers 1990s Stern can hear him today without curling up from secondhand cringe. The former king of all media now spends his airtime lamenting social expectations instead of confronting them, and Greg found the whole thing as sad as it was absurd. Then he handed things over to Megyn Kelly. If Greg was the dynamite, Megyn was the scalpel.com, steady and ready to slice clean. And Stern. He was about to get dissected.
A good week. I did, and no thanks to Howard Stern. True, the New York Post reported that Stern hit a chic restaurant in NYC with a crew of A-listers, including Jimmy Kimmel, Jennifer Aniston, John Hamm, Justin Theroux, Jason Bateman. I was not invited. I guess because my first name doesn't begin with the letter J.
Megyn began by saying that Stern's shift from rebel to relic wasn't shocking, it was bound to happen. Rebellion without values always ends in compromise. She argued that Stern wasn't courageous, just noisy, and there's a difference. When shock value was no longer necessary for ratings, he stopped being outrageous. She explained that Stern's transformation wasn't personal growth, it was survival. It was about keeping his place among media elites, and in doing so, he abandoned the very audience that made him famous. Megyn said the original Stern mocked conformity, while the new Stern sells it packaged neatly into podcasts. She didn't hold back on his attempt to rebrand himself. Nobody asked for a softer, wiser Howard Stern playing late-in-life therapist. People wanted honesty, edge, that unapologetic voice he once was. Instead, they got him whispering about enlightenment between celebrity interviews that feel more like group therapy sessions in Beverly Hills. She ended by calling out his newfound morality. The man who once thrived on chaos now lectures others for being offensive, as if we should ignore his long legacy of shock jock antics. Megyn said this wasn't redemption, it was revisionism. Stern was trying to rewrite his own legacy with a highlighter in one hand and a Sharpie in the other.
There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
I agree with you.
And when I see them, how did you react to this Saturday Night Live?
Here's Stern on anyone daring to poke a little fun at Kamala.
Even when I watch them on Saturday Night Live with the where they have Maya Rudolph playing you, I hate it. I don't want you being made fun of. There's too much at stake. I believe the entire future of this country right now, I mean, as America, land of the free, home of the brave, I think it's literally on the line.
So a guy who's supposed to be funny for a living now claims her candidacy is too important to joke about.
Megyn then focused on the irony. Howard Stern, who once railed against censorship, now uses political correctness as a shield. She said, he didn't join the establishment. Tit swallowed him. The man who mocked virtue signaling now proudly wears the sash. She compared the old Stern to a lion and the current one to a declawed house cat, purring for approval from the very crowd that once called him dangerous. He didn't evolve, he retreated, not for wisdom, but for acceptance. Then came her most biting criticism. Megyn called out the hypocrisy of Stern, painting himself as an outsider while mingling with elites, living lavishly, and lecturing everyday Americans on empathy and progress. This is the guy who once tore down the walls of political correctness, she said, and now he's busy building fences around his privilege and calling it growth. She ridiculed how Stern avoids addressing his past. Like an ex, he refuses to acknowledge carefully dodging decades of controversy, as if they don't connect to the calm, guru-like persona he now presents, but Megyn argued the two can't be separated. The old Stern built the empire. The new Stern is just renting the penthouse. And she wasn't done. She asked how someone who once spoke truth to power now spends most of his time agreeing with them. These days, Stern doesn't sound like a rebel. He sounds like someone auditioning for a guest seat on a CNN panel. He went from firebrand to background noise.
Well, I just saw it actually, and it was funny. I am a huge fan of Maya Rudolph's. I think she put a lot of time into doing the piece and the character.
Okay, so I do think it's interesting. He's very scared. A lot of I hear this from a lot of my Democrat friends. They're scared of Trump winning again. They're scared of Trump.
Nothing in Stern's previous career that could withstand this modern witch hunt that he now embraces. So this is a form of restitution. Maybe he says, if I'm woke too, the crocodile will eat me last, but they always do eat. But I get it. He flipped from populist to elitist because now he's with elitists. He's living in the Hamptons. What would the Stern of now think of the Stern of before?
Megyn's tone sharpened as she pointed out that Stern's old career thrived on making people uncomfortable in ways that sparked real conversations. Now, she said, he's afraid of discomfort, afraid of criticism, of labels, of straying even slightly from the new cultural norms he desperately wants to impress. Then came her final blow. Stern didn't grow, he shrank. He retreated into wealth, compliments, and elite praise, all while pretending he's still the same unfiltered guy behind the mic. But the filter is there, now it's just written into his contract. Greg jumped in with one last jab. Stern's like a comedian who forgot the punchline but keeps telling the joke. Every episode feels like he's begging to be taken seriously by a world that never needed him to be serious. He joked that Stern's future show might resemble a retirement home radio hour, where guests wear robes, sip tea, and talk about feelings, forgetting they used to be entertainers. The revolution Stern once claimed to lead has long since passed. All that remains is a faint echo whispering through a golden microphone.
Right after the Columbine massacre, that the killers should have raped the students before killing them. Not that I like that Stern, but this pendulum swing from saying the most tasteless thing in the universe to putting your balls in a Tic Tac container. You gotta wonder what's going on here. It's striking that the king of the most misogynistic humor ever now turns into a breathless over a progressive, hopelessly shallow candidate.
Megyn agreed, saying Stern's tragedy wasn't that he evolved, but that he gave up his identity for a seat at the very table he once flipped for fun. He didn't become wise, he became quiet. Not for peace, but for approval. And with that, they both left the door open. In the world of radio legends, relevance has an expiration date, and Stern's may already be past due. Greg leaned in again, unable to resist one more swipe at Stern's crumbling legacy. He said the most entertaining part of Stern's downfall isn't even the fall itself, it's how completely unaware Stern seems of it. It's like he's locked in a soundproof booth of self-delusion, still imagining himself as the outsider, the rebel, the provocateur, while everyone else watches him blend into the establishment he once mocked. Greg described the old Stern as someone who ran toward controversy like a moth to a flamethrower. Now, he runs from it like it's a bad online review. He chuckled. Stern used to broadcast with brass knuckles. Now it's all soft gloves and emotional whispering, the kind of radio that comes with a weighted blanket and a cup of chamomile tea. He's no longer the king of all media, just the Duke of Disclaimers.
This is Stern's self-imposed penance for subjugating women to demoralizing stunts, capitalizing on desperate females thirsting for attention, even if it's from an oily paddle striking their bare asses. True, much of Stern's transformation is based mainly on a delusional hatred for Trump, but it's also coming from a bottomless hatred for himself and his past.
Greg mocked how Stern now fills the airwaves with therapy talk, emotional stories, and long rants about his personal spiritual growth, which somehow always end with how misunderstood he is. Greg laughed and said, "It's not a show anymore. It's an audiobook no one asked for, narrated by a guy trying to convince himself that relevance comes from repeating what's trending on Twitter." Then Megyn stepped in one final time, calm and direct. She said what's most disappointing is that Stern had the platform, the power, and the courage to question everything and then chose to question nothing. He went from defying the crowd to begging to be part of it. Not because he believed in the new rules, but because he was afraid of being left behind. She said Stern made his name on defiance, but now defines himself by how politely he can follow the script. In doing so, he's become a shadow of who he used to be, a warning of what happens when rebellion is traded for comfort and authenticity is sold for clout. Megyn added that Stern doesn't need to apologize for maturing. but pretending. Maturity means erasing the past. That's not growth, that's fear. And when your whole legacy is based on brutal honesty, trading that in for validation is the real betrayal.
Howard's simply redefining masculinity. And why is it always the male lefties who are so desperate to get rid of masculinity entirely? It's guilt and self-preservation. Because scrape beneath the surface of any liberal male, and what do you find? A creep, terrified of his priggish past. Piggish past, I mean, not priggish. What is priggish?
Greg nodded and summed it up the only way he knows how. Howard Stern didn't just leave the building, he remodeled it, replaced the walls with mirrors, and now spends his days admiring his own reflection in a place he once promised to burn down. That's the real tragedy. Not that he changed, but that he forgot who he was. The shock jock became a sanctuary host. The provocateur became a people pleaser. The rebel's voice is now just an echo, bouncing around a velvet-lined studio. Because when the king stops leading the rebellion and starts begging for applause, the kingdom doesn't collapse. It just tunes out. And that's silence. It's louder than anything Stern could ever scream into a mic.